Hey guys, I am excited to be back. In fact, I'm so excited that I chose to come to our empty classroom just because I miss seeing you guys and doing this in person. And I just thought this would be a great place as we begin to filter back into society to meet. I also missed my whiteboard. So I know you probably can't read half of this, and that's okay. It's for reference points, and we'll walk through it as we go. But we're in Psalm 145 today. I'm excited to be teaching like this, and as we do this, it is a lot. So what I want to do is I want to keep this simple. I'm going to give us a few things to point out as we go along the way. We'll read through and then we'll wrap it up using the psalm itself. But here's what we need to know just to kick things off. First off, we are in Psalm 145. This is the last psalm of David. And this is important for a few different reasons. The primary reason is this. It begins the closing section of the book of Psalms. See, Psalms is 150 psalms long, and the final 5 are these psalms of praise. And this is theologically significant because what we see in Psalms is the outpouring of someone's heart. We see the calling on upon God, the worship of God. We see who God's character is on display. We see our sin on display, our needs on display, and the consequence, the conclusion of all of this in this conversation, this dialogue, is that it should naturally lead to praise. And this is so pivotal that in Psalm 145, you're going to see that same thing happen, but slightly different. You saw me just point over here. Verse 1 and 21 actually sandwich this entire psalm in a declaration of praise. So we'll get to that in just a moment, but that is worth noting. Now, with that said, we're going to see a few different things on display that I want us to pay attention to. The first one is the idea of praise itself, because this is not only one of the psalms of praise, but in addition to that, praise plays a central role throughout the psalm. Second is identity, who God is, his character on display, his place among creation, and who he is in our past are all going to be used by the psalmist. And then finally, eternity itself. God's kingdom, how long is it? It is eternal. How does this play out in the psalm, and what part does it have in God's identity and our praise? And the last thing I do want to talk about is something that I love about this psalm, but something we can't get into. And that's this. The psalmist uses this incredibly poetic and powerful tool by changing the listener of his psalm. It's really cool. He'll start with proclamations to himself or to his people, and then he will shift and proclaim on behalf of his people something to God. And he'll work this back and forth, and you'll see it in the sections as we cover it. And this is not just meant to be poetic. This is meant to be theologically enriching and deep. And it's something that if we had a full class, I would want to dig into and really unpack. But we're going to draw attention to it and talk a little bit about it at the end. Just be aware that as we read through 1 through 45, I will ask you, just listen for that. Pay attention to who's talking to who. So let's kick it off. Verses 1 through 2. And you're going to see our breakdown right here on the board. Probably can't read it in orange, but we'll do what we can and keep moving. It's Psalm 145, verses 1 and 2, a psalm of David. I will extol you, my God and King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you and praise your name forever and ever. So I told you right off the bat, Psalm 1, or verse 1 and verse 21 are going to sandwich with praise. And here you see this clear first person line right here. I will praise. I will praise you as King. And I will praise you forever and ever. So all 3 of our themes are introduced right here in verse 1 and 2. And he's going to continue to unpack those as you go. But I just want us to take note that we start the entire psalm with a choir leader before his worshipers, or the worshipers, and he turns to God. And he says, I will worship for all to hear. I will worship my King, and I will do this forever and ever. Verse 3. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works I will meditate. They shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They shall pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness and shall sing out loud of your righteousness. And if you catch that, it's very subtle in there. There's a shift in the audience again, but here's what we see. A generation will praise. They will praise you for your acts. And that this praise is meant to be generational. It is one generation not alone, but passing this on to another generation. And this is key for how we're going to understand eternity. Because this idea of eternity isn't something as simple as this tree will die. This was made now and it will be destroyed then. It was an understanding that God's kingdom lived in his people, and that his people would pass this on through their children, and that this was how we participated in an eternal kingdom. But he also shifts in there, not just a generation, but in response to that I. So he says, a generation will praise you for your acts. I will declare your majesty. Then we shift again. They, going all the way back to the generation, they will declare your might. And what's pivotal in all of this as we talk about this idea of eternity is that the Hebrew people had a much finer understanding of tense than we did, meaning how our words interact with time. And so one thing for them is that when we may say, I'm going for a run or I'm going to run, those would come across as two different things for the Hebrew people. And what we see here, even though we see words like shall and will, is that this is a future infinitive tense, meaning simply that it is going to happen, but it's going to be ongoing. You do not see a stop in the action. So when we say, I'm going to run today, technically this would say this is going to happen and it will end. In Hebrew, they may say, I'm going to run today. It would be the same thing. But if I say I'm going running, you would assume I'm going to stop. In Hebrew, they wouldn't make this assumption. I'm going running means that I will continue to run. It will happen. It will not stop. And we're seeing that with the psalmist here. I will praise, I will declare, I will sing. These are going to be ongoing statements of their state of worship moving forward. But that right there brings us through verse 7. Let's jump into verse 8. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and his mercy is over all that he has made. All your work shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and all your saints shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to the children of man your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. You see, he did it again. If you caught it, we start with a declaration about himself. He then shifts to a declaration to others about God. And then he shifts finally to a declaration to God about others, their response. And he did that right here again. His first statement is to God, or to other people, about God's mercy and about his love. And then immediately he lifts up other people and says, all of creation will worship you. And you can see that shift right there. He's talking to God about creation at this point. And we've now gone beyond us. We've gone beyond a generation. We've gone beyond his people to all. And so that idea of praise is expanding throughout the psalm, just as our understanding of God's character, his intrinsic personhood is expanding. And this time we see two things about it. Number one is it's generational. And number two, that it is eternal. So that same idea of this being passed on generation to generation is being carried forth. But now we actually see the declaration that God's kingdom is eternal. So this is what we have going on already. And now we're going to get into verse 14 through 16. We're moving quick. We're going to make it, but stay with me. The Lord upholds all who are falling and raises up all who are bowed down. We have that same shift. He turns to his people. The Lord, what's he going to do? He's going to uphold. He's going to raise up. And then he turns to God. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food in due season. You open your hand, you satisfy the desire of every living thing. And I love this idea of desire. Again, it's theologically rich. I want to jump into it. We don't have time. But what I want to note right now is that we now see that God is the fulfillment of human desire. And all people are not just actively praising, they are looking to God to have that met. That's his proclamation. That's what he wants to see. And again, we're seeing this as an eternal thing because of the tense of what's going on. But normally, I would begin to wind down my psalm here. We would begin to summarize and say, why does all this matter? Why actually split this into praise and identity and eternity? Why talk about the generations and the us and the I and the people and all of creation? Why talk about God as king and acts and majesty in this kind of quick detail? But what I love about this is that the psalmist does this for us. So I want you to listen here Listen and hear how he captures the essence of his argument, and we'll begin to kind of meditate on that as we end. We're in verse 17. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and kind in all his works. You see, we've seen his splendor and his power. We start to see his mercy and his love enter, and then he gets here. The Lord is righteous. You see, for the psalmist, all of this begins to build and build and build, and then we recognize it. Who is God? He is the great, righteous King who upholds and raises, who fulfills our desire. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desires of those who fear him. He also hears the cries and saves them. The Lord preserves all who love him, but will destroy the wicked. You see, what he begins to do here is this. He paints this picture of this king, again, with all this power, all of this might, all of this majesty, and then he parallels that with a God who is close. A God who is near, who upholds, who raises, who fulfills our desires, and listens for those who call on him, that he may save them. We saw this movement of how recognizing God's goodness created praise in one person, that then created praise in a generation, that then created praise that was meant to be generational, that then moved from an I to a we, to an all of us, to all of creation. All based on this connotation, this idea that God is both king, that he is ultimate, and he is intimate, that he is personal. And the psalmist begins to wrap this up because he begins to talk about salvation. He begins to talk about drawing near to God. He begins to paint the picture of a God who can overcome anything. The God who, in the face of whatever's happening in this world, is a God who empowers and holds dear his creation. And so the reason we go through this, the reason we look at this verse in detail like this psalm, is so that we can rest assured that as we reintegrate with society, as we move out of phase 1 and out of phase 2 and hopefully into phase 3 in the next few weeks, that we can rest assured that God is good and God is powerful, and that he will raise up and uphold us, that he will save us, that he will empower us, and that our faith, our worship, was meant to be contagious. So this is why we go all the way back to the end, or all the way back to the beginning and the end. We started it with this. I will extol you, my God and King, and bless your name forever and ever. And then he ends with that same proclamation, spelled out a little different. My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord, and let all bless his holy name forever and ever. If God is this good and this personal and this powerful, I want to be with that. I want to interact with that God. I want to love on that God. I want to praise that God, and I want to be filled and empowered by him. And I want to have the courage and the strength to move out into a world that is unsure right now and that is afraid, and offer some ointment for that. Offer some peace. And so my challenge for you today, my challenge for you this week, is to spend some time in 145 with me. Spend some time in the Psalm. And simply meditate on who God is and his promise and what that means for us moving forward. Because what we see here again is that good, good God. And our call is to worship. And I look forward to worshiping in person with you guys soon. But in the meantime, I encourage you, worship. Worship around your neighbor when you see them. Worship with your children. But remember, this was not something they moved into and out of. This was not a Sunday morning thing. This was a lifestyle for them. This was a way of life. And as we move forward, we are to be in this eternal, this ongoing sense of worship with our attitude, with our minds, and with our heart that is always pointing back to God in recognition of who he is and what he's given us. So my prayer for you guys this week is that you recognize God's presence, that he is near, that you trust that he will uphold you and save you in times of need, and that you will join in an ongoing sense and an ongoing process of worship that extends beyond Sunday morning and into our everyday lives. But God bless, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.